Normally, I would get into the history of this film when I start the video, but I did already talk about this film when I did my History of Canceled Halloween movie series, so if you want to know more about the specific history of this film, I would watch that. Link is in the description. While I did do a quick synopsis there of the story, here I wanted to get into specifics in regards to the script. Well, as much as I can at least, without just reading the entire script from front to back. So that is what we will do today. But before that, I will give a quick background for the canceled film. Essentially, the basic gist is that after Halloween the Curse of Michael Myers failed miserably, Dimension was considering making this a direct-to-video franchise, just like what they did with Hellraiser, Children of the Corn, and The Prophecy. So they hired a writer to make a bare-bones and cheap Halloween movie that could be made fairly easily without it connecting to previous movies and pretty much start afresh. So they got Robert Zappia to write the script for Halloween 7, which he called Halloween: Two Faces of Evil. The script starts off in Nauvoo, Illinois, 100 miles from Chicago. The family of the Wileys get out of their car while someone is watching them. Deborah, their daughter, has to babysit her little brother and complains about it. Her parents leave for a date night while a killer watches her from the bushes. She makes her way into the house and the killer follows her and peers in from the porch. Deborah goes upstairs to use the phone and it cuts to her brother and his three friends playing hide and seek. The killer moves to the back of the house and enters the house. He grabs a knife from the block. Lee, Deborah's brother, then starts to hunt for his friends as the seeker. Meanwhile, Deborah is still on the phone, oblivious to the threat that is in her house. She uses the bathroom only for there to be a figure behind the shower curtain, which turns out to be one of her brother's friends. Then the phone and lights go out in the house. After a fake out, the killer starts to strangle Deborah. She claws his arm and gets out of his grasp, but she backs herself into a corner and the killer slits her throat and stabs her. Her brother Lee and his friends hear her screams. Lee makes it to her room and finds his sister's mutilated body and screams, which can be heard throughout the neighborhood. It then cuts to the opening credits. Cut to later, paramedics and officers everywhere. We are introduced to our protagonist, at least one of, Richard Kincaid, and his newest recruit, Janet Blake. They talk about Michael Myers, although spelled wrong throughout the script with two E's, how it was his MO, but he's been locked up in Middle Rock Penitentiary for 3 years. Kincaid decides to pay Myers a visit. Kincaid heads to Middle Rock and it is a state-of-the-art prison, highest levels of security and newest technology. Kincaid has a dry wit throughout his interactions with the guards, who log in all of his information and whatnot. They have Myers under the most top-notch security, 24-hour surveillance, magnetically locked steel doors, surrounded by 3-foot concrete. Myers is not leaving, the warden assures him. Even a state-of-the-art tracking device is strapped to his ankle. Kincaid sees Michael sitting there with a straitjacket and leather face mask. He does what he always does, sits in silence, and also drinks his meals through a straw. Michael peers at the warden and Kincaid talking. Kincaid is worried they have a copycat on their hands. Michael is breathing harder and harder. Cut to Hillcrest Academy, an all-girls boarding school, which is described as very gothic in its architecture. We are introduced to our protagonist, Joanne Whittington, and her friend Linda Kang. They have a cute back and forth about a test, only to see that Joanne gets bullied, revealing her shyer personality and the spunkiness of Linda. We are then introduced to another friend, Sherry Hackney. They discuss a dance and sex, typical horror movie cliche conversations. Cut back to Middle Rock and we see a guard making his rounds when he sees Michael on the ground, motionless. He calls for backup and the physician, Dr. John Ashford, to enter the cell to see what's going on. They open it up and the SWAT team enters. Ashford is scared but eventually enters himself. He feels Michael's jugular, no pulse. He orders the jacket to be taken off and the guard reluctantly does so. He confirms that Michael is dead, albeit with a jump scare. They put him in the back of the hearse, and a couple guards talk about how he is dead this time. The guy, named Chuck, starts driving him to the morgue. Mr. Sandman starts to play. He gets to the morgue, and he and his coworker take Michael to a holding room. The mortician, named Tom, starts talking about making money off of him, and how he's ugly as hell, and the such, and then Michael snaps up. Chuck is scared as hell, but Tom is unaffected as he believes it's just rigor mortis. Tom leaves and Chuck wheels him into the refrigeration room. After the door starts opening and closing, Chuck goes back in and notices Michael gone, and Michael stabs him in the head with a bone saw. Tom hears Chuck screams and heads back in. He heads into the refrigeration room and opens the now closed body bag, which now includes Chuck dripping blood. His skull is split and the entire body bag is filled with blood. Before Tom can scream, Michael stabs him in the throat with a draining rod, which drains the blood from his body. Tom falls down, dead. Cut back to Hillcrest, and the main ensemble of characters are in a drugstore. Linda is with her boyfriend Jeff, along with Sharon, Stoner, and Chad, womanizer, Frank, skinny-looking dweeb, Eddie, Sherry's boyfriend, and Joanne, who looks extremely uncomfortable being there. Eddie set up a mannequin display of Michael Myers, which is apparently inaccurate. Frank points out in this scene that Myers never used a butcher's knife, but a chef's knife, finally making a proper distinction between the two that so many seem to forget, as well as him not only killing virgins like Eddie claims. Everyone tells him to shut up. They eventually leave after some bullying towards Joanne when we see a familiar hearse parked outside, and Eddie is locking up the drugstore along with Sherry. They try to have sex when Eddie hears the door jingle. There's a scuffle, Sherry goes out to the front of the store, and the Michael mannequin has tweaked its position. She finds Eddie dead, and eventually Michael strangles her too and does the famous head tilt. Cut back to Kincaid's office. We see him yelling on the phone about how Michael is back, certainly reminiscent of a certain doctor we all know and love. Kincaid is convinced he's back, and Janet is skeptical and doesn't think so. They then go back to the case in the opening of the film. No prints anywhere, but they did find skin and blood underneath the victim's fingernails. Janet mentions that a magician was at Lee's birthday party last week, and apparently he was a creep. Kincaid is about to jump on the case when Janet hands him a printout of Cain Gabriel, a convicted rapist. Kincaid then heads to his address. His landlady takes Kincaid to his apartment and does the typical spiel about how he's a good guy and everything. But they enter the dingy apartment to find tons of info on his walls about Michael. The landlady goes back to her place while Kincaid surveys Cain's apartment. There is a jump scare involving a Michael Myers Jack-in-the-Box. Cut to Cain doing magic at a children's hospital. He is seen leaving when Kincaid meets up with him. He flashes his badge and he starts running, and Kincaid pursues. There's a quick chase scene when Kincaid tackles him and his magic stuff falls all over the ground. He slaps handcuffs on him, and Cain's expression is unchanged. Cut back to the drugstore. Officer is putting up yellow tape when the headmaster of Hillcrest Academy, Mr. Elliott, shows up. They found the body of Sherry but no Eddie, so now the police assume it's him. The girls talk about if they knew they snuck out last night and talk about Sherry. They want to check it out to see if they can find Sherry, and they walk over to the hearse. Before they can open it up, the headmaster catches them and tells them it's just a burglary, but they suspect something else. Joanne definitely knows it's bullshit. She sees something near the hearse, and it's just Chad, who kisses her. But the heavy breathing from the shape is heard. Joanne breaks free and heads back to the bus. Cut to the police station with Cain getting booked. They need warrants, but it'll take a while, so in order to get Cain's blood, Kincaid trips him, he faceplants, and cleans the blood from his face. Kincaid has Janet send it to forensics. Cain is brought to a holding room, and Kincaid starts interrogating him. Cain is calm and collected while Kincaid tries to push a confession out of him. Cain admits that he can just leave, and undoes his handcuffs with ease. Kincaid tries to not act surprised. Kincaid can't find his light for his cigarette, and Cain produces a lit match from behind his ear. Kincaid is still not impressed. Cain inquires about Michael, and Kincaid admits he's missing. Cain explains he can help them to maybe meet his idol, and states that Michael isn't dead because he probably slowed his heartbeat to make it seem like he was dead when he wasn't. Kincaid gets a call saying Michael's ankle monitor is still on his ankle and it's moving. Cut back to Hillcrest. We experience the famous scene with the shape outside of the classroom watching our protagonist. A little while later, we see students decorating the grounds for Halloween. The trio walk back to their dorm talking about the Halloween dance. Joanne sees the shape again, but no one else does. She's worried. Cut to Kincaid back to the Middle Rock prison, watching where Michael is. They find him and they're ready to jump into action, but Kincaid is skeptical about how easy all of it is. Cut back to Hillcrest. Curfew is called and the entire school is lights out. It cuts to Joanne and Linda's room. Linda is asleep and Joanne can't, with Lurch, the school dog, next to them. Joanne sees a shadow of a man and it frightens her. She turns to the window and sees no one. She's scared when she hears a bang bang. She finds it's only Frank Roth coming to see her. She begrudgingly goes out to see him as she doesn't want to get caught. Cut to Kincaid where there's a manhunt for Michael with the warden and guards. They go through the thicket of a forest guided by the ankle bracelet. They only find the mutilated body of Eddie Cotaro with the bracelet wrapped around his neck. Kincaid has now confirmed Michael Myers is alive. Cut back to Hillcrest. Joanne and Frank are making awkward conversation as they walk through the school grounds. The shape is watching them. They continue to converse about the dance. Frank asks her to go with him as his date, and she accepts. They kiss only to be interrupted by Mr. Elliott. He takes them to the office while the shape is watching. Cut to Kincaid. He's in his apartment, and it's the classic messy apartment from a cop who works too hard that you see in many movies and TV shows. He has a ton of cardboard boxes marked Dr. Loomis. He's going through pictures and footage to figure out any information information he hasn't collected yet. He has a bad dream about the shape trying to kill him, but he wakes up soon after. The next day, Kincaid heads to the station and starts talking to Cain Gabriel, who now has 3 pairs of handcuffs on his wrists. They start talking about Lori, Jamie, and Jamie's baby, the only reference to the previous movie. Kincaid thinks he's going after the baby due to past experiences. Cain just laughs, comparing him to the absurdity of Dr. Loomis. He even impersonates him with his silly prophecy that Michael has to end his entire bloodline, which somewhat retcons the previous movie, but whatever. Cain doesn't believe it and has his own theory. His theory is that Michael is sexually obsessive over his victims, and since he never learned how to deal with those emotions properly, he stalks, hunts, and kills them instead. But Cain could also attribute it to the most popular theory that Michael really is just the boogeyman. Cut to Hillcrest. Linda is giving Joanne a makeover, and it's pretty much stated that due to breaking curfew, Joanne is banned from the dance. Linda leaves to get something and the shape comes in, but due to wearing a face mask, she can't see it's him, and assumes it's Linda. He leaves. Linda comes back, confused about who she's talking to. Joanne is also confused and kind of scared. Now they're in PE doing laps at the pool. Thanks to her 2 dipshit friends being blabbermouths, the entire school knows she got busted with Frank after curfew. Their teacher lets them go 5 minutes early while Sharon stays for the rest of the time after arriving 5 minutes late. She dives into the pool and starts swimming with everyone gone, which by the way makes no fucking sense because she's only supposed to be there for another 5 minutes, and why the fuck would the teacher leave? I know slasher movies are supposed to be dumb, but this is ridiculous. Anyway, Michael is watching her through the pool. She breaks through the water and sees no one is there. The lights in the gym shut off, leaving her in darkness. She starts to get out of the pool when the shape grabs her throat and shoves her into the pool and drowns her. Then he closes the retractable pool, or whatever the hell it's called, to hide her body underneath. Cut to Kincaid. Cain has been released on bail despite it being $50,000. They have no choice but to release him despite the fact they're getting the DNA results back that night. Kincaid is sure he did it and is pissed he can't do anything about it. But before he can think about it for too long, a deputy comes in and tells them that they found the hearse, and Kincaid breathes a little easier. He meets with Cain and offers him a ride, and Cain seems intrigued. Cut to Hillcrest. It's Halloween, and tons of costumed kids are making their way across campus to the gym. A band of troublemakers are armed to the teeth with eggs and toilet paper. The custodian, named Wally, chases after them, but they get away, and he has to stop because of his age, and he goes back to the bell tower to ring it for the time of day. One of the troublemakers runs into the shape, but he lets him go. Joanne is stuck in her room, looking out on the entire campus as they go to the dance while she's stuck in her room. The campus dog, Lurch, is on her bed, keeping her company. Wally is making his way into the bell tower when she sees the shape following him inside. Then Linda, as the bride of Frankenstein, comes up behind her and scares her. Linda plans to meet with her boyfriend, dressed as Dracula, in the cafeteria to go have sex. The bell rings, which signals to them the night is starting, and Linda gets excited and then leaves after petting Lurch. Joanne sets her sights on the bell tower and sees the shape is ringing it and is somehow staring right at her, almost through her. She sees Linda leaving and then sees the shape has disappeared. She just shoos it off as a prankster and then lays on her bed, grabs a shot of booze that Linda left, and downs it. Cut to the cafeteria and we see Linda getting eaten out by her boyfriend Jeff. He then starts unbuttoning her blouse and they're ready to do the devil's tango when Linda states that she has to pee. She tries to go to the bathroom only to find the stall locked despite no one being in there. She goes to the next one and does her business. She then goes out and stares into the mirror to see if her makeup is okay and doesn't notice the locked stall is now open. She exits and there is no sign of Jeff anywhere. She goes to the kitchen to find Jeff in his cape and she wraps her arms around him only to reveal the shape. She screams and he lifts her by the throat and he hits a pot rack above her and pots and pans go flying everywhere. She flails around and kicks the fridge door open to find Jeff's mutilated body. Eventually she breathes her last breath and the shape admires what he did. Cut to Kincaid and Cain in a marsh. He sees the hearse nose deep in the marsh. The rear door is swung open. They took some bodies out of the hearse and one is the mortician who got his blood drained and the other is who got the bone saw in his head. Kincaid is disturbed by the scene while Cain is unaffected and makes dark jokes about the whole situation to the dismay of the deputies showing Kincaid everything. They eventually triangulate the shape's location, which is still hundreds of miles to comb. But Cain enlightens Kincaid that Michael is at Hillcrest because that is apparently where his sister went to school at one point, most likely Judith. Kincaid agrees and they head over there. Cut to Hillcrest and the campus is empty outside of the gymnasium. Joanne is still in her room laying in bed bed, thinking about how she could be out there having fun, but alas, cannot. Lurch starts growling at the closet and she gets up and turns the closet light off. She then goes to the bathroom, and Lurch follows her. Cut to the dance, and it's tricked out in Halloween decorations and the such. Sharon's boyfriend, while dressed as a condom, is looking for her. He leaves the gym while the troublemakers from before chain up and exit to the gym, and one of them heads inside. Cut back to Joanne's room. She passes the closet door, which is ajar once again. She climbs into bed and starts petting Lurch next to her bed, disappointed that Frank didn't come to see her. But at that moment, Lurch comes into the room and starts growling in her direction. She stops, frozen in fear. She leans over and sees the shape. She screams. He grabs her arm and pulls her to the floor. He tries to climb on top of her while holding onto her to keep her from running away. He slices her left thigh and she screams. Her legs flail and eventually kicks him in the head and escapes his grasp. She gets out of her room and limps down the hall. She ducks into one of the rooms and hides behind the door. The shape comes walking down the hall and passes by the room where she's hidden. She breathes a sigh of relief when he walks back and sees her shadow on the wall, which he notices. He tries to grab her through the door, but she pulls it towards her, which jams his arm into the door, and she escapes her predicament once again. She's flying down the hall as fast as she can with her bloody leg when she bumps into Chad. She's telling him that Michael is trying to kill her, but Chad doesn't believe her and thinks it's their friend in a mask. But she shows him her bloody leg, and Chad still doesn't believe her, thinking it's all a prank. He walks towards him. Michael grabs his latex hat and suffocates him with it. He dies, and then focuses back to Joanne. Meanwhile, the party is hopping, and one of the troublemakers decides to open the pool and takes the button with him so they can't close it back up. They head back to the entrance and leave. It begins to move, and the students are laughing and getting into it, getting away from the edge. The troublemaker gets out, and the others lock the final door. They pass Joanne running for her life despite screaming her head off. They pay her no mind and head into the woods. She gets to the gym, trying to get in, mimicking the famous scene in the original of Laurie trying to get into the house. He closes in as her screams fall on deaf ears, as the sounds of the party outshine her screams of terror. The gym then joins her in terror as the pool is now fully open, revealing the body of Sharon. They try to get out, but due to the prank, they can't leave the gym. And ironically, Joanne is trying to get in to escape the shape. She decides to head for the bell tower and start climbing. She sees someone below and starts going faster. She gets to the top. She tries to ring the bell, but nothing is heard. Wally's body is stuffed inside. She eventually pulls him out and tugs again. The bell starts to ring throughout campus as dozens of cop cars pull up to Hillcrest, all headed by Kincaid and a psychopathic passenger. He sees Joanne screaming her head off, ringing the bell, and Kincaid definitely deduces from this that Michael is here. Kane does the same, but in a happier, enamored kind of way. Joanne is still ringing when she sees a shadow get closer, and it turns out to be Frank, but he then collapses in her arms as a bloody knife is jutting out of his back, with the shape closely behind. The shape moves towards her, but she grabs the knife out of his back to protect herself. She stabs him in the shoulder when he lunges for her. He grabs it and pulls it out and throws it away. He then starts strangling her while pulling her over to the edge. As she starts to lose consciousness, bullets start flying. Kincaid shooting bullets into Michael. He empties his cartridge. Michael falls over the edge and plummets down after releasing Joanne from his grip. Joanne is on the floor crying while Kincaid reassures her. He looks over the edge to see Michael gone. He helps Joanne to her feet. He hands her over to the paramedics while he talks to the deputy. He explains he emptied his cartridge into him and fell 4 stories. But as we know, that means nothing to Michael. Janet reveals to Kincaid that Kane did in fact kill the babysitter in the beginning, to the shock of no one. Kincaid now has to find 2 killers. They eventually reach the thicket of woods with Michael stumbling out. Kincaid states to open fire, and a dozen police officers start shooting him to hell. They finish, and Kincaid goes up to him with a new cartridge. He rips the mask off to make sure he's dead, only to reveal Kane Gabriel. Kincaid tells them to call it off. It's not Michael. Kane grabs him by the shirt and whispers into Kincaid's ear, "Impressed yet, Kincaid? I made Michael Myers disappear." He then breathes his last breath and dies. Thus ends our Halloween tale. So that is the specifics in regards to Halloween 2 Faces of Evil. On the one hand, I am glad that Halloween didn't get sent to the bargain bin for it to live out the rest of its days. However, at the same time, this would have been so much better than Halloween H2O. Sorry, but I know a lot of people like it. I'm not a fan. It's an overall very boring movie with a terrible shape, characters I don't care about, and feeling more like a Scream movie than a Halloween movie. This feels like a Halloween movie, but a more unique one, and trying to do something different with it. I like Kincaid and his back and forth with Cain Gabriel, to the point I wish Cain was in the movie more. The final girl is good, but feels kinda stock. It would have been disorienting to go back and forth between the two so much, and probably would have caused some kind of pacing issues, but I still thought it was a unique concept to have the police going after Michael and following them doing so. However, I do hate how they kinda made the Michael's hunt is about sex canon. Possibly it could have been Cain bullshitting, but even then, that's never been the case and was never the intention of Hill and Carpenter. It's an idiotic theory that was only vaguely implied in the Curse of Michael Myers producer's cut, and the last thing we want is to take notes from one of, if not the worst Halloween movie of all time. I just find it extremely dumb, as well as the use of jump scares like in the actual movie. Overall though, it's a damn good script, and I think if they just made this movie but for the big screen, we could have gotten something truly unique and interesting rather than the TV movie diet Scream we got. But maybe with another draft or so, because I believe this was probably the first draft. Tune in next time, though, for another canceled Halloween movie I've covered that will get a more in-depth script read-through. See you then.